Is it? Hello, welcome to the grill. My name is T, and I've got Cody Bondarchuk. Bondarchuk, that's right. From the word tastawiyiniwak. I think I pronounced it correctly. And tonight we're going to be talking about his priorities, why he's running, etc. To get us started on the grill tonight, I'm going to ask Cody to tell us a little bit about himself. So, Cody, over to you. Can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much, T, for having me on tonight. So for folks who are tuning in who don't know me, my name's Cody Bondarchuk. I'm running for Edmonton City Council in Ward tastawiyiniwak, which is up in north central Edmonton, Castle Downs, Londonderry, all of those great neighborhoods. This is my first time running for office. I would describe myself as an independent progressive person looking to make change at City Council and really kind of shake up the status quo. When it comes to me and my background, I've had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different things through work and through volunteering. I've been the president of a community league. I've been the CFO of a nonprofit. Most recently, I was the constituency manager for an MLA for 4 years. So with that work, a lot of what I did was connecting constituents to resources if they needed them, trying to kind of fight back bureaucracy if they're having issues in things like healthcare or education. So I think that a lot of those skills are very transferable to the municipal level. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Cody. I'm just wondering, I did my introduction without my mic. I forgot. I'm just kind of wondering, there is equally good and progressive candidates running in your ward. What do you bring that's different from the rest of your team?
Yeah, I think I more than any other candidate in this race, I think I stand out for being ambitious yet collaborative. I think that those are two ideas that can be held at the same time. Like I said, I'm not really here to just kind of sit in a seat on council and twiddle my thumbs for 4 years. That's very boring to me. I want to be there
Sorry,
to.
Cody. Sorry, Cody. You said collaborative. I just wanted to jump in here. I watched an interview you did with the keeper Edmonton. Does collaborative in this sense, the keep Edmonton, something like that, the keep times, does being collaborative equals to letting your other colleagues go ahead on this race? Would that be defined as being collaborative? Because in that interview, you were trying to describe being inclusive as well. But would be being able to work with others in this case mean you're going to let the other fine candidates go on ahead
Oh,
to win? Is that what you're trying to say by being collaborative?
not collect like I will say it's been so refreshing to have such a respectful and a really welcoming race in this ward, but that doesn't mean certainly that I'm not running to win. By collaborative, I mean the work that I would do once I get onto council and working to persuade others to enact the agenda that Edmontonians want to see. So certainly I can hold those two things at the same time, where I am happy that all of my interactions with the other candidates have been very positive and very friendly. But I mean, in a way, we're working together for the betterment of all Edmonton. But certainly, I can also be running to win this race.
Oh, absolutely, and you should ideally run to win. I understand that your mom was a former president of a community league, and she gave you lots and lots of wisdom tips. Is there one nugget that you think about every day when you go out to canvass and campaign?
Yeah, the thing that I talk about quite a lot is that when I was first elected to be our community league president, my mom, who like you said had been on that board about a few decades earlier, she told me you have to go into every meeting knowing how people are going to vote because you've already talked with them to get the results that you need and to persuade and collaborate with them. Right? It is not responsible as a representative to go into a meeting and then start pitching the meeting where the decision and the vote is being made. You can't start convincing people then. You have to work with people ahead of time to enact your priorities. So I think that is the responsible way to go about it, rather than trying to get everything kind of done last minute. So, I mean, it worked at this community league level, and there's no reason it can't work on city council.
Before we came on, Cody, I mentioned to you that you're like a wise man. I've been on your website and I'm struck by the detail you've given your policies. So I'm coming, and I thought maybe you would be that you are an academician, and you said you're a researcher, and you know about this sort of municipal policies also because you spent 4 years working for an MLA. And so this is your territory. You know the words, so when you talk about you're running to bring the bold progressive change in the areas of housing, community development, mobility, and public safety, what strikes me there, like, this is just politics. What does the word bold progressive means? These are issues the city has already tackled. What are you going to do differently, and how bold are your own policies when you compare them to what the city already does?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think that the city, Edmonton, it's the place I grew up. It's actually the only city I've ever lived in. So I have a lot of love for Edmonton, while also realizing that there's a lot more that needs to be done. Of course, I guess my main criticism of Edmonton as a municipality, how it's been functioning, is there are a lot of great ideas, but they don't get the runway that they need or the resources that they need to be enacted. An example that I can use, City Council just passed the CEIP into into bylaw, which is essentially the energy efficiency upgrades for private homes. The city is planning on doing a 2-year pilot program, which would only service less than 100 private houses. That is not what we need to do to reach the goal of net zero emissions to combat climate change. We need to make that program permanent today. It's already been proven to work in many, many jurisdictions. So while the city is heading in the right direction, they drag their feet on an awful lot of stuff. And I think that there's a lot of evidence out there that things can absolutely be sped up. And that's the same thing with affordable housing, using a housing first model to tackle chronic houselessness. It's the same thing with offering fare free transit and making sure that it is paid for and subsidized through the city budget, not at the point of service. These are things that across the world in many cities and jurisdictions have proven to work. And Edmonton, will be playing catch up, right? And that actually costs us more money in the long run. So it makes sense to enact these things now.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about Edmonton and what bold means, but what I'm still not getting is the differentiation between your own policies and what already obtains. Are you saying if, for example, you become Councillor Bondarchuk, you are going to be looking for consensus to get things done now as opposed to down the line, or?
Yeah. And certainly,
Yeah.
and certainly in my platform, I mean, I have, we're releasing the last part of it tomorrow. So right now there's 24 priorities on there, and there will be 28 as of tomorrow. But out of those, there are some bold ideas that have not been considered in city politics.
What are these bold ideas?
Yeah, so electoral reform and strengthening democracy is one that I know it's not always the number one issue for voters, but I care about it very deeply. I think that the city would be served so much by having a ranked ballot system to elect its councillors. I don't know if you know, but in the last 3 elections, less than half of the city council has been elected with a majority. Routinely, councillors are getting elected with 30, 35, 40% of the vote. And I mean, they're legitimately elected. That's a mandate. But I don't know how strong it is. The incumbent councillor in this ward, he was elected with 29% in the last election. I don't know how you can go into council and say, I speak for all the people in this ward when that few people voted for you. Having a ranked ballot system.
Is it that people don't care? 29% is low. Even the federal election was for 9%. People maybe don't really care about politics. What will you do to make them a bit more engaged? Right, but go on with what you were saying.
Yeah, well, and that's certainly the turnout, and the city turnout issue is it usually hovers around 35%, and that's quite a problem as well. But showing people that, I think, having a ranked ballot system, which essentially means that whoever is elected is guaranteed to have a majority of support of the people in the ward, that instills confidence in people and makes them more likely to participate in the democratic process, right? Like, it's easy, of course, to say, oh, people don't vote for so many reasons, but I think an important job of an elected person is to look at why people are not engaging with the system and try to fix it. We have to come to people. I'm not just going to sit there and be like, oh, it's your fault if you don't vote. That's not a very fair thing to say.
I mean, I suppose with rising inflation, Cody, and this pandemic thing, that maybe people are not thinking about what changing the ballot system. I'm just wondering, out of curiosity, when you go knocking on doors, what are the actual fears people are talking to you about? Are they concerned genuinely about changing the ballot system at municipal level?
Well, depending on what the issue is, a lot of it is done in bylaw. I was just using democracy as an
As an
example.
example.
And like I said up front, right, like, it's not every single one of my priorities. Like, everybody has a different number one issue. But when I talk on the doors with people, what it comes up over and over again, I'd say the two things are affordability and transit. And of course, affordability is a huge umbrella term, right? Like, there's so many pieces to that, but it comes down to things like housing, like mobility, like access to services. And the affordability problem that people are seeing, it's not that people are concerned with the level of taxes that they're paying. They're concerned about not seeing the value in those taxes. So it is bringing those services to the ward, especially up here, right? Like, it's a cliche that I sadly commiserate with a lot of people that live here. And again, this is my neighborhood. This is where I live now and grew up. The north side does not really get the same level of service as the rest of the city. And I say that not to be a downer, but more to talk about how we could expand services. The recent bus route redesign left out a number of different neighborhoods in this riding, in this ward, including 82nd Street has like no direct service north-south. That is a huge problem for people, especially because we have a higher percentage of people who use transit in this ward compared to the city average.
I mean, it would seem to me like that not just the north side has problems, but women and children generally have problems or issues around affordability when it comes to housing, mobility, etc. I'm just wondering what a councillor Bondarchuk will do for women, will do for children, will do for residents, or people of the north side. And I know you're a proud resident of the north side. What you'll do for all these people if you were to become councillor.
Yeah, I think that, again, like, it's every government has its role to play, but at the city level, I see a lot that we can do, especially when it comes to things like affordability and housing. I've talked with a lot of people when we've gone door knocking in rental buildings and in condos that are rented out. I have a policy that would bring in rent control in Edmonton. That is something that a lot of people have been very interested in, because that is a way to guarantee not just affordability, but predictability. The number of people that I've talked to, it's so concerning that their lease is up for renewal and they get slapped with a $100, $200 increase to their rent, but nothing about their property's changed. And $200 extra on a rent that maybe is $900 or $1,000.
I read that policy on your website, but my problem with it, Cody, is I'm just wondering about the enforcement of it. Do you know if it's being enforced, and how? The second question there is, how would undocumented immigrants even cope with the rent control? The question is, how would undocumented immigrants benefit under this policy? Sorry, I'm just throwing so many things out here.
No, it was me that put out a platform that reaches every possible inch of the city. So it's fair to have questions on anything. When it comes, so the first part, it's absolutely enforceable. Any person who is renting out 3 or more units in Edmonton has to apply for a business license with the city of Edmonton. And the city has a department called Tenant Support Services. They work closely with the provincial landlord and tenant, that would be the Residential Dispute Resolution Service. So so the tenant support services at the City of Edmonton absolutely can assist and enforce when landlords, because landlords again are fall under city bylaw because they are renting 3 or more property. When it comes to undocumented folks that live in Edmonton, the city has already passed a bylaw that they do not check for ID or citizenship or validity of status in this country when accessing city services. And the same thing would apply if someone is already in a rental unit and they may not have the paperwork to demonstrate that they are, in Edmonton, they would still be able to access that service. That wouldn't change. That is already a city policy.
Yeah, but the problem, thanks for that, Cody, but the problem is undocumented workers at single parents families may not know of all these bylaws. So it takes me to the next question. How would all these things become known to the people in your ward, can I say constituents? How would they know that there's recourse for them? I don't know. And one other thing was I noticed I wasn't seeing single parents, women and children in your plans. I know you got them covered, but so can you explain the different things that Councillor Bondarchuk could do for women and children?
Yeah. So when it comes to people knowing their rights, I mean, that is a persistent problem, unfortunately, at all orders of government. And it actually kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it is not an elected representative's job to just sit down and wait for someone to come to them. We have to go out into the community and talk to people, bring politics to them. And of course, like the city has already had experience. And even this year, right, when the speed limits changed, the new trash rollout, those were all communicated well in advance to people with lots of lead time. So the communications wing is certainly something that City Council can utilize to make sure that gets done. But again, like we've said before, it's about bringing things to people, not just expecting them to know it, right? And actually that does lead well into your next question, because often it is single parents and especially single parents of young children who are not able to frankly, they don't have the time, because a lot of them are working multiple jobs. They don't have reliable childcare because it's too expensive. So I can't blame someone if they work 2 jobs to support a couple kids and they don't have a partner. I can't blame them for not voting and not knowing the bylaws inside and out, right? That's when it becomes the city's job to reach out to them. And a lot of my policies are geared specifically towards single moms, young women in the workforce, and people with young children and larger families as well, right? That's another, that's quite a common thing in Ward Tastawiyiniwak, is families with 5 or 6 or more children. It is our responsibility, and often those folks are below the poverty line, so these policies would undoubtedly affect them. They just have to know about them. So it's about outreach in addition to policy.
I enjoy when you talk because I'm listening. Now, one of the things you're saying is being inclusive, and you have the experience of being someone who walks across the aisles. You work collaboratively. That is the word there, and you're inclusive. I want you to shed more light in how you intend to bring things to people, how you intend to bring politics to people as opposed to people to politics, and generally how inclusive will you be, because we're all diverse. And I don't know that many councillors, and I hear you've said this in one of your interviews, that you're not maybe happy with the current code of with the current way councillors behave. And I'm gonna ask you a bit more about that, but right now I want you to focus on how inclusive will you be, and how do you intend to bring politics to the people?
Yeah, I think honestly, it starts from all the people I've talked to and all of the experiences I've had. People aren't invested in politics if they don't see themselves in it, right? And in some ways that's a hard thing for me to say, right? Like, obviously I'm a white dude, I look like many people in politics, and I understand that is absolutely something that needs to change. It's I'm happy to hope to in some ways represent the LGBTQ community on council.
Do you feel being white is a barrier in this case?
Oh no, it's a huge advantage to me, right? And that's the problem that needs to change. People are very used to seeing someone that looks like me and think, oh, that's status quo, I don't want to bother. Some of the most important things that have happened in politics happen because people finally see themselves in it. So like I said, like I would represent one marginalized group, the queer community, but we need people on council that represent all kinds of communities. I can't remember if I used this example when we had our forum through Ladies Corner, but I love using it, so I use it all the time. There's a book called Invisible Women, and it showed the real life consequences of not having a seat at the table for different people. Because, you know, critics of diversity and inclusion say, oh, you just want quotas and you just want like it for the sake of it. That's not true at all. For years and years in auto manufacturing companies, there were no women on the test safety boards. And it was a fact that statistically, women were more likely to die in car accidents because the crash test dummies that were used for car testing were a standard male body. So it's not just that it would be nice to have like women at the table, it's that when they aren't there, there are negative consequences for women in society. So I always pull that out as an example when people are saying, oh, you just want like diversity for the sake of it. It actually saves lives to have diversity. And like I said, I can only represent one marginalized group, but we need to bring more people in from all those different groups.
Cody, what are you going to do to bring women and indigenous and disabled? And I hear queer and I salute you for it. What about the other groups? What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Let's address that.
Yeah, the most important thing to do is to talk to those groups about what it is that's preventing them from running, right? For women, a lot of women have told me, and a lot of my friends, it's because of the additional violence and threats that women in politics face. I have not gotten a single death threat in this campaign, thank goodness, but a lot of women running in across Edmonton cannot say the same. For Indigenous people, a lot of them fully, frankly, just don't believe in the concept of government, because we have kind of come in here and taken their land, and they don't want any part of it, right? So what I would do, because I can only know those experiences from talking to them because I haven't lived them. So what I can only do is go to them and say, what is it? What are the barriers that are preventing you from being on council, from participating in democracy? And then from what they tell me, we enact that. That happened earlier this term in city council with Parity Yeg, which has encouraged so many women to run. I don't know if we have the final numbers yet, but at least anecdotally, it looks like a lot more women are running this time. So now how do we replicate that for the Indigenous community, for the Black community, for the Filipino community? There are so many different ways to reach out.
Thank you. Dealing with getting women to run, can you also deal with how you will reach to, we've ticked the queer box, to Muslim women, Somali women, Arabic women, Indian women in your constituency? You want to tick those boxes for me, please? I hear what you're saying, how to get women into politics, but I'm looking at a Councillor Bondarchuk. How will they know? How will they be up to speed with your work? How will you bring them on board? Do you get my question?
Yeah, well, and again, I think it is very similar where it's reaching out to those communities, right? And talking to them about the policies that matter. Actually, a story from the provincial election that I find interesting, like the last provincial election. And like I've said before, I'm happy to disclose that I used to work for the Alberta NDP. I have a lot of friends in that party. We did a lot of campaigning in mosques. Especially here on the north side, and there's a lot of Somali Muslims that live in this area. When campaigning at mosques, what they had told us was that other parties would just come into mosques and talk to them about issues about anti-racism. And certainly those are good policies. But what we did was we went to mosques and talked to them about issues of childcare, of healthcare. I think a lot of people of color feel alienated by some politicians because they think, oh, you're only going to talk to me about racism because my skin's not white, right? Like that's what a voter would say. But no, like obviously, like Sikh people, Muslim people, they also need childcare and healthcare. And it's about not patronizing them, right? You have to go into that community and build those relationships without being patronizing and saying, I'm a white guy coming in and I'm going to tell you what to do. That doesn't work. You have to really, really focus on what they're telling you and take the lead from them and then put in the work on their behalf.
Thank you so much, Cody. Thank you for using that example, you will go into the mosque. But one thing you brought out was you worked for an NDP MLA. So are you affiliated at the moment with any of the parties?
Other than being a member of the Alberta NDP, which I've been for 10 years now,
Yeah.
there's no formal affiliation.
Are they
When
the ones
I
paying for your campaign? Are they paying for your campaign?
No, well, they actually would not be allowed to, right? It's
Oh,
against the
okay.
election rules for parties to financially
Okay.
support candidates. I very much believe in the value of independence in municipal government. I resigned my job with the NDP when I started running, or when I like in the summer, because I believe in that independence, right? I don't think that past political involvement burns you from it. I just don't think that you should be accepting structural support from a party when it's not their business,
But
right?
do they support you privately though? They're not in your favor.
Well, they're like I've said, I have friends that I've met in my
Yeah.
time there that have donated and that are volunteering their time. But of course, like the party itself is not giving anything, nor do I think should it, right? The party has a
Well, that's
provincial
what it's
election to
saying.
focus
Yeah.
on.
Right, and that'll be the honorable thing to do. Let's talk about the elections, the federal elections yesterday. Which candidates were you rooting for?
Yeah.
Uh,
Any candidate that is going to bring that new energy, I very much vibe with, because that's the type of work that I want to see. I was very happy to see that Blake Desjardins was
Yeah,
elected in Edmonton Griesbach. Of course, part of
yeah,
his riding now as the MP elect overlaps with Ward tastawiyiniwak. And again,
yeah.
it's regardless of party, whoever can bring that energy and say, let's actually get moving to do things, because a lot of politicians, like I said, they just like to sit there. But I could not think of anything more boring. So why would you do that, right? You need, if you're done, like if after 2 or 3 terms, like if I'm elected, God willing, after 2 or 3 terms, if I don't have any new ideas, get me out of there. Get someone else in there that can do it. This should not be a 30-year career unless you keep bringing those new ideas. So yeah, like I said, Blake Desjardins, fantastic that he was elected. Heather McPherson, of course, in Centre was reelected. And she has a long streak of helping out constituents. And Ziad Abou Taif in Edmonton Manning, who
Oh
I
yeah.
overlap a bit with. Again, because of my previous work, I've worked with his staff a lot. They, again, outside of party affiliation, his staff are so good at helping constituents with what they need with
Yeah.
EI, with CPP. Like it's about bringing that energy and that support for your constituents. So I think it was a good night for Edmonton overall.
I think so too. Are you happy? So you're definitely happy that Heather McPherson and the guy at Edmonton Grace Bar won. Definitely, I was rooting for them.
Yeah, those two were exciting. I
Yeah.
don't pay as much attention to Strathcona just because it's on the other side of the river, but Griesbach was just
Grace Bar, yeah.
seeing that excitement was remarkable.
Have you heard about Randy Boissonot, yeah, Edmonton Center?
That
Has that
one,
been called yet?
that is a very close race between him and the Conservatives and potentially the NDP. She is in
Yeah.
third, but not that far behind. So waiting for mail-in ballots to be counted, and then we'll see what's happening in the heart of the city.
Okay, so that was our break talking about the federal elections. Let's talk about your plans for economic diversification. How can the city do more for economic diversification?
Yeah, well, above all, it is about promoting the ability for Edmonton to be a place to grow a business. I talk about this along 2 different streams. Is that, of course, all of the nice things about funding different projects and making room for emerging industries. That's all well and good. The big focus needs to be attracting business to Edmonton and attracting business to stay. Like I said before, we have a wonderful city that I love very much. We have the biggest urban green space in the continent. We have, with the River Valley, we have remarkable artistry here, the second biggest fringe show across the globe every year. So Edmonton, those things need to be sold, right? Like to people as reasons to come here and set up shop here, especially because a lot of the new economy and a lot of emerging industries are going to be focused on technology. You can set them up anywhere. You know, back in the day when extractive industries were all that we could do, you can't just set up an oil rig somewhere in Manitoba because there's no oil there. But technology you can set up as long as you have an internet connection, you can set it up anywhere. So those are the industries that we need to attract, and we do it one by certainly providing that support and that those grants and those resources, but by proving that Edmonton is a world-class city where your employees want to go. And that includes advocating to the provincial government. If we don't have strong healthcare and education, people will not want to raise families here. So it's an entire package of how social supports can actually stimulate business growth. It's not an either or. These things support and help each other, right?
Yes, my problem when it comes to this topic, economic diversification, is I think is elitist in a way. Like jobs in the tech industry and artificial intelligence will only crop a certain part of the community, and jobs from companies like Amazon, McDonald's, etc. again is for another end of the spectrum, maybe the low enders. But then there are people who have maybe migrated from Asia, from Africa, who are also educated, but there are no jobs for them. Is there anything a councillor Bondarchuk could do for these people who are not into tech or artificial intelligence, who are also not suitable for Tim Hortons and McDonald's? I'm not suggesting those jobs are wrong, but they're just not suited on that scale.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that you said that, because yeah, every single job in our society is valuable, or else it wouldn't be a job, right? But I think that this is largely provincial jurisdiction, but something that I've actually said to a lot of people on the doors, just because I can't vote on something in the city does not mean that it's not my job to advocate. So in this case,
Yeah.
what the federal government has responsibility in this as well. So both of those orders of government, they've both talked quite a bit about credential matching to make sure that if someone has, you know, the credentials of a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant in another country, that it is easier for those to be transferred. I can't tell you the number of people I know that are not working in their field because their degree wasn't recognized, even though they are much smarter than I am, and especially at the job that they do. So and again, there's not a lot the city can do when it comes to credential matching, but the city, knowing that it helps the city, we need to be right at the federal government's door to say, this is why you need to create a credential matching program that works for people, right? If we cannot change things ourselves, we have to be the advocates for change.
I feel personally disillusioned that the credential matching is not going to go away. I think it's a problem that entrenches systemic discrimination in Edmonton, in this society. Just like you, I know a couple of doctors who are unable to acclimatize or get into what they need to do. Other than advocacy, what else could you suggest when talking about economic diversification?
Yeah, I wonder if there would be some sort of. I know that when governments, like for example, when the previous government was in government here in Alberta, they offered retraining funding for people that were in coal, because coal is being phased out, right? So I wonder, and again, like I would hope that primarily we would be able to work with people on what they already know, if that's something that they want to do in practice. But if they're coming here and there are discrepancies, or they want to, you know, they're like, hey, I'm going to come to Canada and I'm going to branch out and have a new career and start in a new field. I wonder if retraining funding could also be opened up as an opportunity to new
It's not
immigrants.
just the money. I get advocacy. It's not just throwing money at it. What about opportunities to find the work? I know doctors who come from England and they're here years after. No one will give them an opportunity because they do not have the Canadian experience. And this is a problem. This Canadian experience thing, it's a problem I don't know if it'll ever go away, because what I'm thinking it does is it entrenches generational poverty. Because you come here as a medical doctor, and after 5 years, you still cannot transition to be a doctor. After a while, you just give up and you join McDonald's as, I don't know, you just find something else to do. And I know people personally, pharmacists who can't who can make the transition, doctors who can make transition. Just out of curiosity, is there anything in all your policies? You are the policy writer, you're the researcher, you can do for all these people?
Yeah. Well, that opens a whole other can of worms because that almost
Oh
is
yeah.
kind of like, how do we tackle xenophobia, right?
Mm,
And like the outsider bias that happens in Canada, right? Of course, Canada always prides
mm,
itself on being better than the US, but like
mm.
the US is such a terrible example. You're not really patting yourself on the back that much if you're like, we are better than them, because there's still a lot of issues, right, in Canada. And that's a whole multi-pronged approach, right? But I think it
Yeah.
does. It gets to the root of your question of why are these things happening? And it very well could be xenophobia, right? If someone does not want to hire you, even if you have the skills, because you're not from Canada, that's not very much in the
No, it's not
spirit.
it's not xenophobia. No, it's more institutionalized than that. But maybe this is not the right platform. I don't know what, my friend is a doctor, she couldn't get a job because the Alberta health people, they put in an additional clause. They really didn't care if she was black with pink stripes or pink stripes and orange dots. It's just something in their code, in their books, that no one ever gets past. So I don't know. Maybe that's not for it. But let's go on to something lighter. You put out a tweet a couple of days ago and that went viral. So you've become a viral star. Tell us about that tweet, Cody.
Yeah, well, so the tweet I put out last week was a reference to, so when I went viral, that was about 2 years ago.
Okay.
So to relive this, yeah, 2 years ago. So when I was a kid, my first job was working at McDonald's, and working in when I had shifts in the kitchen. Me and actually a lot of other staff too, because the boxes were also big enough, would routinely put an 11th nugget in the box of 10.
Yeah.
I tweeted that 2 years ago, just as like, a thought that pops into your brain. You never know what happens. I have so many funnier tweets that have never taken off. And that one went incredibly viral. Tom Hanks saw it and read it out on a video. I was on radio stations. It still to this day is a little weird to me that such a simple sentence went so far. But last week when I was at McDonald's, I finally, after 2 years, I ordered a 10-piece of nuggets and there were 11 in there. So it was kind of like I got to relive it a little bit, which was very, very
Oh,
cool.
oh, I see. Because all right. So well, that was your break. Now let's get back to work. How would you encourage climate justice in the decisions you make?
Yes. And this is the question of our time, right? I don't think that we are really able to do anything else if climate catastrophe comes, and by all accounts it will come. The interesting thing about Edmonton, and I don't reference this specifically in my platform, but what is interesting to me, Edmonton as a city, we are fairly inoculated from natural disaster. Of course, there have been tornadoes that have been pretty bad in the past, in 87 especially. But generally, Edmonton weather, while it can be finicky and kind of weird, we're not really prone to natural disaster. So Edmonton and places like it will become a place for climate refugees, right? So I talk to people who are like, but Edmonton's not on a coast. It's not going to get like super hot or super cold. First, I sadly think it will. But also, we are going to have a huge influx of climate refugees, and how do we plan for that? So with that in the back of my mind all the time, I think about what are ways that all different orders of government can address it. So I've laid out in my platform a few different ways that the city can pull some strings. Like I mentioned earlier, the private home improvements program. The big one would be a complete shift in how we look at energy and how we look at a transition, and a transition that doesn't leave workers behind. I talked earlier about the retraining funding that was available for people that worked in the coal industry. That is exactly what I'm talking about. It is, while we have to get out of these extractive industries, it is so unfair to pull the rug out from workers, especially people in their 30s, 40s, 50s that are not near retirement, and tell them, good luck, go find something else. The government has to be there for them when that happens, because if it will happen, right? And Edmonton can either lead the way, or we can have to play catch up, which is a lot more expensive. When we're talking specifics that the city can do, it's switching over to an all-electric bus fleet. It's new types of infrastructure that are more green. So we can be job creators at the same time that we're pursuing green projects, right? It can go hand in hand.
Is the city ready for that, for all electric buses?
I think so,
Do
absolutely.
they have the money for it?
We can, right? We can make it a priority. That is and again, like I've said, responding to these innovations after they've already been like well used in other places is only going to cost more, because we'll be scrambling for them when other people have put that infrastructure in place, right? I think that it just has to be a priority. With government, the money can be there. You just have to make it a priority. That's what it's again, like the budget's not limitless. I'm not going to go nuts here, but like it's about how we shift funding around to make sure that it has to be a top priority.
All right, one of your priorities actually is your third priority is how do long-term care homes and retirement residencies operate? And what struck me was you write a brilliant policy, but you are not, I don't see anything about the people who work in the industry. So the question is, the building of affordable, not-for-profit, long-term care and retirement residencies does not improve the care or the living wage of those who actually work in the policy. What can we do to help the people in that industry, because their quality of living, they work so hard and understand the money, the wage, their take-home pay really cannot take them home?
Oh yeah, no, it is almost criminal, the very little that we pay people to look after loved ones as they age, right? I absolutely do think, though, I think publicly run long-term care homes and residences absolutely can improve working conditions and wages, right? I talk about in the policy that a for-profit care home, there are horror stories that we heard, especially after the first wave of the pandemic, especially coming out of Quebec, that people, like, there will be private for-profit care homes where they say, you've already used like your allotment of diapers for the day, right? So no more. That is not how healthcare is done. That is a completely backwards way of thinking about it. When a long-term care home is focused on not on profit and is making as much money as they can, but when their primary focus is on the care of their residents, then they will have access to better resources. They will reinvest the money that would otherwise be profit, both in those homes and in the workers, right? There's a long and proud history, especially in Alberta, of public and nonprofit workers being unionized. And as we know, unionization and collective bargaining leads to better wages. So that money can be reinvested in workers rather than lining the pockets of shareholders.
Yeah, I agree. Well done on that. That was a brilliant answer to perhaps a difficult question. How are you doing for time, Cody? Would you like to take a couple more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is this grilling you enough?
I am having the time of my life.
Should we turn on the heat just a little bit more?
What more do you have?
All right, so you finished your glass of water. That was your break. Let's carry on. All right, so the Community Energy Transition Strategy and Action Plan. Do you know what that is? Community Energy Transition Strategy and Action Plan. I'm feeling myself like a counselor. Look, big words. The Community Energy Transition Strategy and Action Plan. What does this mean, Cody?
Off the top of my head, can you jog my memory?
I got it from Taproot, I think, and you agree with that. Let me see what your answer was. They asked you 30 questions.
Yes.
And this was one of the questions you answered. And I thought, oh, this is really big. I need counsel.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
To break it down and explain what does this mean.
Yes, sorry. It is. I can't tell you the number of reports I've read in the last few months for those surveys. So, and they're all very good. It just takes me a moment to jog my energy. Or to jog my mind, I should say. So yeah, the action plan here, it's very similar to the policy I put out about transitioning to a low carbon economy. What I really like about this plan, it exceeds the federal government, of course, initially set a target of a 30% reduction from 2005 levels, and they've bumped that to 40. This plan aims for a 50% reduction because the goal is net zero and then carbon neutral, right? I think, again, it's been like a long time since we have identified what the issue is when it comes to pollution, which is causing the climate catastrophe that is impending and in many places of the world already happening. So this energy transition is a piece of what the city would do to cut those emissions more so than the federal levels, which is, I mean, that's something to be proud of, right? I've always thought Edmonton is a leader in many things, and this is no exception. We would be exceeding the federal government's Paris targets.
So, what is there anything we can do to take this a step further, or we are happy with the 50%?
The 50% is, I think, a good benchmark for now because it is above, like it's 50% by 2050, which is, it's in some ways it's a long way off, but in some ways it's coming up very soon. So it's certainly within many of our lifetimes. So for now, it's good when we have benchmarks, because built into this plan as well are benchmarks. So if by 2025 or 2030, the situation is looking more drastic, that's when it can be reevaluated. It's a high goal to set, but I think it is an appropriate goal for now because there's nothing saying we can't reevaluate it later.
I hear you, Cody. Again, from your website, one of your priorities, you can ask for a mansion tax. And I want you to explain it to me like I was a 5-year-old. What is a mansion tax and why would it work?
Sure. So Edmonton's property tax system is essentially, there are some other tweaks to it, but in the simplest sense, what happens is every year the city budgets out what it needs, and then using that number, it sets a property tax rate. And this is the tax rate is usually a decimal, like it's 0.07694, like it's, a bunch of numbers. But that is essentially the rate that is then factored against the assessed value of each property. And then what comes out of that, when you multiply the assessed value of your property by that amount, then you get your property tax bill for the year. So for a house that's, $400,000 in an average neighborhood, your property taxes are generally about $3,000 a year, a bit higher sometimes. The way that I don't like how it works is that the city just uses a flat modifier for everybody. So sure, if your house is assessed at a higher value, you will pay more in taxes, but it all goes up on a very consistent flat rate. Other forms of taxation are progressive in the sense that when you make more or when something's valued higher, you pay more taxes, right? Like if you make more money, your income tax is in a higher bracket just for that portion that is above it, but you essentially pay more in taxes on a bit of an expedited scale. What I would like to do is bring in an additional modifier that would be put on top of the standard tax rate for houses that are valued. I believe I said the top 5% of homes, which would be about 19,000 homes in the city, and the estimated value would be about 1.1 million or more. But that would amount to less than $1,000 more in tax every year, which certainly folks would be able to afford, especially because pretty much everybody uses the monthly payment plan. And then we have a system that is more fair, right? Instead of it just being the same across the board, it is tailored to the value of your home in an amplified way.
Yeah, I hear you what you're saying, Cody, but what I didn't find when I read your policy was what would you give as a respite to homeowners who have been adversely affected by the pandemic? They've lost their jobs and they cannot pay their property taxes. What I understand from my circle of friends, I'm not quite sure if it's a Black problem or if it's citywide, but I can tell you from living experiences, there are some people, maybe before the pandemic, they were senior accountants, and during the pandemic that left. So they're on the 2-week payment. I think it's called employment insurance. And how do you pay a 15,000 property tax bill on that? What are your thoughts on what the city could do to help this in-betweeners, because of the pandemic, they've lost and they're just struggling to make their ends meet, etc. I don't think it's a Black problem.
Oh yeah, certainly it is. It is. People have said this before. It's certainly not my phrasing, but it's this idea that the pandemic, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm, but in different boats based on the resources that we have. And the city already offers property tax deferrals and other issues, like, especially if you've lost income, because again, like at the pandemic. So what the city did citywide was not change the tax modifier or the tax rate for that year. Although, of course, if the value of your home went up, you still did pay a little more. But essentially, it was a zero on taxes in the last year. That was for everyone. But there are always payment options and different deferrals available for people that have lost income because of the pandemic. Now, outside of it, if it becomes a longer term issue, again, that is. I don't know how many people in $2 or $3 million homes are going to long term be struggling. But again, certainly there are many, many different types of situations. So that's not out of the realm of possibility, but there is other housing available, right? Or other ways to seek that support, especially like you said, EI, which it doesn't come close to fulfilling it, but that was something the federal government expanded on as well to kind of get people through this, especially when there's economic downturns in Alberta that preceded the pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Cody. We're running out of time. I still have several more questions. You mentioned or you alluded to the fact somewhere that the city council code was not working. What do you mean by that? What part of the code is not working?
Yeah, and that one was tough. That one came from the Taproot survey, and I love Taproot and what the folks do. Please don't hate me for saying this, Taproot. It was very tough when they only gave 3 or 4 options. I wish there was like a little fill in the blank that we could give, because my interpretation of that question, in a perfect world, the code of conduct is perfect and works just great. The problem is we don't live in a perfect world, right? I think that everybody knows that question is on there because Councillor Mike Nicol has repeatedly violated the code of conduct, and he has just enough friends on city council to not vote to sanction him for it, including the sitting incumbent in Ward Tastawiyiniwak, who has let him get off scot-free when he has been committing workplace harassment. Frankly, I don't want to sugarcoat this, because what Mike Nicol's done would be a legal and fireable issue in other industries and in other employment, like places of work, but because he's elected, we're supposed to have a code of conduct. So everything that the integrity commissioner has done, everything that all the investigations, that's all been done by the code and perfectly. The problem is when it gets to sanctions, there are just enough people to prevent him from ever actually facing what he's done.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to leave that. I'll move to something else. So when we talk about lack of affordable housing and the need for supportive housing, and what the city does is the housing first. Is that right? Housing first, yeah. Okay, what can the city do more? And in your policy, you said the problem was it wasn't consistently done. So the city has thrown in money, grants, they've been advocating for it. What else could we do to solve the chronic problem of homelessness that we have in the city?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, the city, a good chunk of its funding goes to housing first supports, but not all of it. When we're talking about permanent supportive housing, so I absolutely would motion on council to make all supportive housing funding contingent on a housing first model. It is unfathomable to me why someone would need to prove that they're getting sober or that they have a job before they're deemed to be worthy of a place to live. Shelter and a roof over your head is a fundamental human right. If I did not have a job and I was told that I need to find a job before I get a roof over my head, that I wouldn't know where to go for that. You need that starting base to be able to do everything else. And that's what Housing First is. It is saying that people are worthy and deserving of shelter before anything else. So I would I would motion at least to switch over the city's funding to 100% Housing First.
Because it works.
It absolutely does, right? And it costs less in the long run. For any fiscal hawks out there,
Yeah.
again, it's a yes and. It costs more up front, but then you don't have to pay in the long term.
Hmm. Okay, let's move on to some lighter topics. We have about 5 more minutes. So you got 60 seconds. What role do you envision for arts and culture in what tastawiyiniwak? In your word. I don't know if I say it correctly. Forgive me.
Tastawiyiniwak. So very close.
Tastawiyiniwak. Yes, very
Yeah.
exotic. Tastawiyiniwak.
um, arts and
Sorry.
culture. Arts
Yeah.
and culture, like I've said before, is Edmonton is a remarkable place for it. I know we're compared a lot to places like Austin, Texas, for being like maybe in like a jurisdiction that is maybe more rural, but has like this breath of life in this city. And that's not to say, obviously, rural communities have wonderful things going on as well. But in Edmonton, fantastic art scene. What I would do, and your question is perfect, I would bring stuff more north of the Yellowhead, which is where Ward Tastawiniwak is, right? Like of course, we have wonderful artists throughout the city, but they all seem to kind of have shows and festivals that kind of congregate either downtown or on White Ave. Wonderful places. Love White Ave a lot. I went to the U of A. I was there all the time. But we can absolutely foster that culture here as well. Again, it's about bringing things to people. So many families in this ward would be so happy to see parades in this part of
All
the
right,
city.
all right, yeah, more than 60 seconds. Let's jump on the next question. Sorry, Cody. What three innovative projects? Just 60 seconds. We're run out of time. What innovative projects would you bring in the first maybe few months after your election? And we'll be watching this again to hold you accountable. What are your top three innovative projects, Cody?
Okay. I'll pull from the platform since, yeah, coming up with a brand new thing on the spot. I think starting the transition to the electric bus fleet is something we have to do on day one. Now, I guess I should clarify, are you talking specifically infrastructure or projects and priorities on council in general?
I'm just talking, what are the three deliverables generally
Okay,
that you want to see done that people can hold you accountable for? Is this too soft for
perfect.
you, Cody?
This is perfect. Number one, start the transfer to electric bus fleet immediately. Number two, ban carding and street checks from the Edmonton Police Service immediately. That will be my very first motion on council if
Ban
I'm elected.
carding, ban it as in stop it.
Completely outlaw it. It is racist and it is completely ineffective, and there is no telling where that data goes. It is so backwards that you, without being suspected of a crime, have to give over your personal information to a police officer when you've done nothing wrong. The provincial government pretended that they banned it, but they just changed the name to street checks. So absolutely, absolutely, that would be my very first motion in council. And I think the last big thing would be to strike. We already have an anti-racism committee on council. We need to strike advisory committees for things like gender-based violence and things like violence against other communities. So it is expanding that inclusivity and that connectedness in the city to other marginalized groups.
Cody, I've got to ask you something. You triggered something in me when you said ban carding. Have you been maybe to the rec center or to Dine or anywhere since yesterday when you had to show your proof of vaccination? Have you been anywhere since then?
Not yet. I've been campaigning.
Oh, you've not gone out. Well, I went to the rec center and I had to show. It felt a bit invasive for me because it wasn't just they wanted to see my driver's license as well. And I'm just wondering, is this the way people feel when they are pulled over by police and they've been carded? I don't know the word. I've not had that experience yet, but I've read so much about the sort of police checks and how it goes wrong in the US and sometimes you're in Canada. So it's interesting that you say that, Cody. Thank you.
It's an interesting parallel. I think that there is a difference because when we talk about carding or street checks, that's not about being pulled over. If you get pulled over because you've like broken a traffic safety law, absolutely they can ask for your license, right? And you should give up your information. But carding is what would happen when police would just stop random people on the street and put their info into a database. So they weren't just checking their ID, which is what would happen with a vaccination status card. That's just to check that everything's all good. But what they would do, and of course, they would target Black and Indigenous people more than others. And that just goes into a black hole of a database that there's not a lot of accountability for. So it's a very different thing because it doesn't serve an immediate purpose.
On your website, you have listed all the people who've donated to your campaign. What was the moral behind this?
Yeah, the provincial government changed the election rules so donors no longer have to be disclosed until after election day. That's not right. People deserve to know who's backing candidates before they go and vote. So it is absolutely, like, just ethically, I have had the fantastic luck of having so many people donate tens of thousands of dollars to support my dream. That makes me cry thinking about it sometimes,
Right.
how blessed I feel. But
Right.
that comes with a responsibility, and it's a responsibility of transparency. And again, I've issued this challenge to every other candidate in tastawiyiniwak, and I'll issue it again tonight. I would love to see their donor list opened up by October 1st, before advance voting starts.
Hmm. Cody, we've run out of time. I want to say thank you so much for being a good sport, for answering our questions. To be honest, I could go on and on. I love that's my timer. I love politics, and I know you love politics too. And what a conversation I thought. Yeah, so that was the grill tonight. Don't go away. I need to end this broadcast. Well, for those watching, that was the grill. Thank you, and see you next time.
Thanks.